I am Natalie, 32 years old, and I devoted my entire existence to satisfying my mother. Regardless of what I accomplished or gave up, it was never sufficient for her. Last month, during her 65th birthday celebration, she delivered a toast that transformed everything. Staring straight at me, she lifted her glass and declared, "The greatest gift would be if you departed from my life." So I did precisely that. I gathered my belongings, disposed of the house, locked all our accounts, and vanished without any trace. If you are interested in learning what occurred when I disappeared, stay tuned. Before I proceed, let me know where you're viewing from in the comments below. Press that like and subscribe button to accompany my journey of finally liberating myself from a lifetime of emotional mistreatment. Growing up in a small Connecticut community called Lakeside, life appeared picture perfect from the exterior. Our Victorian residence, with its white picket fence and perfectly maintained lawn, was the jealousy of the neighborhood. But inside those walls, I discovered early that nothing I ever accomplished would satisfy my mother Catherine's impossibly elevated standards. Catherine Wilson was recognized throughout Lakeside as a cornerstone of the community, president of the Garden Club, treasurer at the Historical Society, and coordinator of every charity event worth attending. Her public persona was flawless. She always had her ash blonde hair perfectly arranged, not a wrinkle in her designer clothing, and a rehearsed smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Natalie, stand up straight. A lady does not slouch," she would state when I was only 6 years old. "Natalie, that dress makes you look pudgy. Go change. Natalie, why cannot you be more like Andrea?" She got straight as again. My father, Robert, was the cushion between us, a kind, gentle man who served as the town doctor. He would enter my room after one of my mother's harsh remarks and try to soften the impact. "Your mother just wants the best for you, sweetie," he would say. But I could see in his eyes that he understood it was more than that. He was the one who attended my school performances when mother was too occupied. He proudly exhibited my artwork on his office walls when she said they cluttered up the house. When I was 16, my father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. The day we laid him to rest was the only time I ever witnessed my mother weep. After that, whatever warmth existed in our house disappeared along with him. The criticism that my father had partially protected me from now came full strength, unfiltered and persistent. "You are getting pudgy, Natalie. No man will desire you if you cannot control yourself," she would say at dinner, observing each bite I took. I was 5 feet 6 inches and weighed 120 pounds. My older sister Andrea had fled to New York City for college and never really returned except for holidays. She was the golden child, the accomplished investment banker with a perfect husband and 2 perfect children. Every conversation with my mother inevitably included, "Andrea just closed $1 million deal," or "Andrea is taking the family to Europe this summer." Despite earning a scholarship to UCLA for graphic design, I chose to attend the state university, just 30 minutes from home. My mother had begun experiencing dizzy spells right as I was making college decisions. Though the doctors found nothing wrong, I could not bear the thought of abandoning her alone, especially after losing my father. So I stayed, putting my dreams of working for a major design firm in California on hold. After college, I took a position at a local marketing agency. The pay was decent, and the 15-minute commute meant I could check on my mother during lunch breaks and be available if she needed anything. I purchased a small house just 3 blocks from hers, close enough to be available, but far enough to have some semblance of independence. Years passed this way. I dated occasionally, but relationships never lasted. Either my mother would find fault with every man I brought home, or my availability was limited by her constant needs. "Natalie, can you pick up my prescription?" The doctor changed it again. "Natalie, the gutters need cleaning, and you know I cannot afford to hire someone on my fixed income." Never mind that she had a substantial investment portfolio that my father had left her. By my 30th birthday, I had been promoted to creative director at the agency. But even this achievement was dismissed. Creative director at a small-town agency is hardly the same as a real executive position, she said when I shared the news over dinner. 2 years ago, Catherine began having actual health problems. Arthritis in her hips made it challenging for her to navigate the stairs in her Victorian home. The doctor recommended a single-level living situation, but she refused to leave the house she had shared with my father. So I increased my visits, doing her grocery shopping, cleaning, and taking her to medical appointments. I converted my home office into a bedroom for her during a particularly severe flare-up last winter when she stayed with me for 3 weeks. I worked from my kitchen table, trying to meet deadlines while responding to her constant calls from the next room. My sister Andrea visited twice a year at most, staying at a hotel rather than with either of us. During these visits, my mother transformed. The complaints ceased. The critical comments disappeared. Instead, she boasted about Andrea's children and asked detailed questions about her work. I became invisible, serving coffee and cleaning up while they reminisced about family vacations I was too young to remember. Despite everything, I still longed for my mother's approval. Each Mother's Day, birthday, and Christmas, I carefully selected gifts I thought might finally earn her smile. A cashmere sweater returned because the color washed me out. Concert tickets to her favorite pianist, and used because who has time for that at my age? A weekend at a luxury spa, declined because I would rather Andrea came to visit. This year would be different, I told myself. As Catherine's 65th birthday approached, I would plan something so special that even she could not find fault. I spent weeks organizing a private dinner at Bellini's, the most exclusive restaurant in town. I invited her closest friends from the Garden Club and Historical Society. I ordered a custom cake from the bakery that had made Andrea's wedding cake, which my mother still talked about 5 years later, and I spent nearly $2,000, money I had been saving for a design course in New York, on a vintage brooch I had seen her admiring at an antique shop months earlier. It was a sapphire and diamond piece from the 1920s, similar to one her mother had owned and lost during a move when Catherine was a child. I thought finally this would be the gift that would make her eyes light up with genuine appreciation. The week before her birthday, I called Andrea and practically begged her to come. "It would mean so much to Mom," I said, not adding that it would mean much to me too to have some support. To my surprise, Andrea agreed, saying she and her husband Thomas would make the trip. As the day approached, I felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. A lifetime of experience told me to brace for disappointment, but a stubborn part of me still believed that this time could be different. This time, maybe I would finally be enough. The day of my mother's 65th birthday began with a series of text messages from her. "Natalie, I hope you told Bellini's I cannot have garlic. Remember last time I had a reaction?" And then, "What time are Andrea and Thomas arriving? Should I pick them up from the airport? Finally, I hope you did not go overboard on this dinner. You know I prefer simple celebrations." I had in fact confirmed her dietary restrictions 3 separate times with the restaurant. Andrea and Thomas were driving, not flying, and would arrive directly at the restaurant. And while the dinner was at an exclusive venue, I had kept the guest list intimate at her request. 12 people total, including her closest friends. I spent the morning at the salon getting my hair trimmed and styled, wanting to look my best. I chose a navy blue dress that I knew was conservative enough for my mother's taste, applied minimal makeup, and wore the pearl earrings that had been a gift from my father on my 18th birthday. Looking in the mirror, I practiced my smile, determined that nothing would ruin this evening. At 5:30, I arrived at my mother's house to pick her up. She opened the door in her bathrobe. "Mom, we need to leave in 15 minutes to make our reservation," I said, checking my watch. "I cannot possibly be ready in 15 minutes, Natalie. You know I take time with my appearance, unlike some people." Her eyes scanned my outfit with familiar disapproval. "The reservation is for 6:15. I told you this last week." Well, they will just have to wait, will not they? Andrea called and said they are running late too. My heart sank. Andrea had not mentioned any delay when we texted that morning. I took a deep breath. Okay, I will call and let them know we will be a little late. Can I help you with anything? You can make yourself useful and steam my navy dress. It is hanging in my closet. I bit back the observation that we would be matching and headed upstairs. By the time my mother was dressed, her hair and makeup perfect, it was already 6:30. I had called the restaurant twice to push back our reservation. We arrived at Bellini's just before 7. Andrea and Thomas were already there, along with most of the other guests who had been waiting in the bar area for over 45 minutes. Finally, Andrea said, giving our mother a hug, we thought you might have forgotten your own birthday dinner. My mother laughed, a warm, genuine sound I rarely heard directed at me. Natalie was running late, as usual. You know how she is with time. I swallowed the correction that rose to my lips. This evening was about making her happy, not defending myself. The maitre d' led us to the private dining room I had reserved. Crystal glasses shimmered under the chandelier light, and arrangements of my mother's favorite flowers, white lilies and blue hydrangeas, decorated the center of the table. Place cards in calligraphy marked each seat, with my mother at the head of the table, Andrea and Thomas to her right, and me to her left. This is lovely, Natalie, said Eleanor, my mother's oldest friend from the garden club. You have thought of everything. My mother made a non-committal sound as she took her seat. The flowers are a bit much, do not you think? And lilies in a dining room. The scent will overpower the food. I saw Eleanor shoot me a sympathetic glance. I think they are perfect, Catherine. Natalie knows how much you love lilies. Dinner proceeded with an undercurrent of tension that only I seemed to feel. The other guests chatted amiably. Andrea regaled the table with stories of her recent business trip to London. Thomas discussed the private school their children attended. My mother beamed with pride at every word they spoke. When I tried to join the conversation with a story about a major campaign our agency had just landed, my mother interrupted. Natalie, could you ask the waiter for more water? My glass is empty. After the main course, the server brought out the cake I had specially ordered, a delicate lemon sponge with buttercream frosting, my mother's favorite. As they placed it before her, the candles glowing in the dimmed light, I reached for the small wrapped box in my purse. Speech, called out Harold, a long-time family friend. Catherine, you cannot turn 65 without sharing some wisdom. My mother smiled, lifting her wine glass. Well, I am not one for long speeches, but I do want to thank you all for coming tonight. Life has given me many blessings. My wonderful daughter, Andrea, who makes me proud every day. She reached over to squeeze Andrea's hand. My successful son-in-law, Thomas, and my beautiful grandchildren. She took a sip of wine, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. And Natalie, of course, always present. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the group. As I look toward the future, she continued, I find myself thinking about what would truly make me happy at this stage of life. They say at 65 you should focus on removing stresses and surrounding yourself with joy. She looked directly at me, her smile tightening. So if I could have one birthday wish, one perfect gift, it would be this. Natalie, I wish you would finally leave my life and let me have some peace in my remaining years. The room went silent. Water glasses froze midway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. I felt 12 pairs of eyes shift to me, then quickly look away. Mother, Andrea said softly, but offered nothing more. What? My mother's tone was defensive. I am just being honest. Is that not what everyone says to do at my age? Speak your truth. She turned back to me. Natalie, you have hovered over me for years, checking in constantly, always in my business. I cannot breathe with you 3 blocks away, watching my every move. I sat perfectly still, my gift box clutched so tightly in my hand that my fingers went numb. The room seemed to recede, voices becoming distant as blood rushed in my ears. "Excuse me," I managed to say, standing on legs that felt disconnected from my body. "I need some air." No one stopped me as I walked out of the private dining room, through the main restaurant, and into the cool night air. I heard Andrea call my name once, but I did not turn around. I got into my car, placed the small gift box on the passenger seat, and sat staring at nothing. It was only when the first tear fell onto my hand that I realized I was crying. Not the heaving sobs that I expected, but silent tears that seemed to come from some deep, hidden well inside me. Years of seeking approval, of making myself smaller to avoid criticism, of rearranging my entire life around a woman who had just publicly stated she wanted me gone. I started the car and drove home in a state of strange calm. Inside my house, I went straight to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Somewhere along the way, I had disappeared long before my mother had wished for it. "She wants me gone," I whispered to my reflection. Maybe it is time I granted her wish. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists, researching on my laptop, and thinking more clearly than I had in years. By morning, I had the outline of a plan. First, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. Then, I made an appointment with Barbara Lewis, an attorney I had met through a business networking event. Her specialty was not exactly what I needed, but she would know who to refer me to. At 9:30, I sat in Barbara's office explaining my situation. I was surprised at how matter-of-fact my voice sounded as I detailed years of emotional abuse, culminating in the previous night's public humiliation. So, I concluded, I want to disappear, not just move away, but truly start over somewhere new. I need to know what legal implications I should be aware of. Barbara leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Natalie, this is a significant decision. Are you sure you would not benefit from some cooling off time? What your mother said was cruel, but completely cutting ties is a drastic step." "I have had 32 years of cooling off time," I replied. 32 years of trying to earn love that was never going to be given. I am done." She nodded, accepting my resolve. "In that case, there are several things to consider. First, disappearing is not illegal as long as you are not evading debt, criminal charges, or child support. You are an adult who can choose to relocate without telling people where you are going." She referred me to James Hoffman, an attorney specializing in estate planning and financial matters. Before I left, she handed me her card. "If you change your mind or if you need anything else, please call. And Natalie, whatever you decide, I hope you find peace." James Hoffman's office was located in a sleek downtown building 20 minutes away. After hearing my situation, he offered practical advice. "Joint accounts are a concern," he said, reviewing my financial information. "You mentioned 2 accounts with your mother as a co-owner. Legally, either account holder can withdraw the full amount. However, if you empty the accounts and she chooses to pursue the matter, it could potentially be viewed as financial exploitation, especially given her age." "Those accounts were set up for her care," I explained. "My father left instructions that the money was to be used for her medical needs and home maintenance. For years, I have been the only one contributing additional funds while she treats them as her personal spending accounts." James made several notes. "In that case, I would recommend freezing rather than emptying the accounts. We can set up a trust with specific disbursement conditions. This protects the assets for their intended purpose while removing direct access." Over the next few days, I set my plan in motion with methodical precision. I contacted a real estate investor known for making quick cash offers on properties. My house, which I had spent 5 years renovating, was worth considerably more than what he offered, but the ability to close within 7 days was worth the financial hit. I visited 3 different banks, closing personal accounts and opening new ones in different institutions under my legal name, but with a post office box in a neighboring town as the address. These would be temporary until I could establish residency elsewhere. I called my manager at work and resigned, citing family reasons that made relocation necessary. 13 years of employment ended with a brief conversation and a promise to email my formal resignation letter. The most challenging task was deciding what to take with me. I had accumulated the normal possessions of a 32-year-old professional: furniture, clothing, books, kitchen equipment. But when I really thought about it, very little of it felt essential to who I was or wanted to be. I sorted my belongings into 4 categories: sell, donate, store, and take. The take pile was surprisingly small: clothes, my laptop and camera, a few books, the quilt my grandmother had made, and a handful of photos. Everything else could be replaced. A week after the birthday dinner, I still had not heard from my mother. Andrea had called twice and texted several times, but I responded only with brief assurances that I was fine and needed space. She did not press, probably assuming this was like other times when our mother's behavior had hurt me. A few days of distance, then back to normal. She had no idea that normal no longer existed. The day before closing on my house, I took a final walk through my neighborhood, the tree-lined streets where I had built my adult life, the park where I took my morning runs, the coffee shop where the baristas knew my order before I reached the counter. I stopped outside my mother's Victorian house, looking up at the dormer windows and wraparound porch. So many memories lived within those walls, few of them happy. I did not go inside or attempt to see her. There was nothing left to say. That evening, I finalized the trust arrangements with James Hoffman. The joint accounts would be frozen, then transferred into a trust specifically for my mother's medical care and home maintenance. The trustee, a professional recommended by James, would approve expenses based on documentation and need. My mother would maintain her lifestyle, but without the freedom to use those funds for whatever she wished. I left a detailed letter for Andrea with James, to be delivered 1 week after my departure. It explained what I had done with the accounts, provided contact information for the trustee, and included copies of financial records showing my contributions to our mother's care over the years. I did not include my new contact information or destination. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" James asked as I signed the final documents. "Once this is set in motion, it will be difficult to undo." I thought about my mother's words at her birthday dinner. "The best gift would be if you left my life." "I am certain," I said. "She asked for this gift, and I am giving it to her." On my last night in my house, I slept on a camping mattress in the empty bedroom. In the morning, I would sign the closing documents, hand over the keys, and drive away from the only town I had ever called home. I had one last task before leaving. I took out the small wrapped box containing the vintage brooch I had purchased for my mother's birthday. I had carried it with me since that night, unsure what to do with it. Now I knew. I placed it in a padded envelope along with a simple note. "You asked for a different gift, so I am returning this one. May you find the peace you are looking for. Goodbye." I addressed it to my mother, adding sufficient postage, and placed it in my bag to mail on my way out of town. Then I tried to sleep, counting the hours until I would be free. The morning of my departure dawned with unexpected brightness. I signed the closing documents at 8, accepted a cashier's check for the sale of my house, and mailed the package to my mother from the post office on Main Street. By 9:30, my car was pointed west on Interstate 80, and Lakeside, Connecticut, was receding in my rearview mirror. I had no specific destination in mind, only a direction. West felt right, like I was physically moving away from the shadows of my past toward something new. I had 3 weeks before I needed to establish myself somewhere, according to James Hoffman's advice. After that, maintaining financial ties to my old life would become more complicated. That first day on the road brought a flood of emotions: exhilaration at the open highway ahead of me, anxiety about the unknown, moments of doubt followed by firm resolve. By nightfall, I had crossed into Ohio and checked into a nondescript motel off the highway. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my laptop and created a new email address, one not connected to my name. I used this to set up accounts with a different phone carrier and various online services I would need. My old phone remained on, but silenced in the glove compartment of my car. I would keep it only long enough to monitor any urgent situations I needed to be aware of. Days passed in a blur of highways, state lines, and changing landscapes. I avoided major cities and tourist destinations, preferring the anonymity of small towns and secondary roads. I paid for everything in cash, using my new credit card only when absolutely necessary. By the 6th day, I reached the Pacific Northwest. The endless green forests and misty coastline called to something in me. I found myself slowing down, taking scenic routes, and staying an extra night in small coastal towns. In a place called Harbor Cove, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in years. Harbor Cove was small enough to be overlooked by tourists heading to better-known destinations, but large enough to offer the basics: a grocery store, a medical clinic, a few shops, and several cafes. The real estate office on Main Street had a rental listing for a small cottage overlooking the bay. Month-to-month lease, furnished, available immediately. It felt like a sign. The cottage was perfect in its imperfection. Weathered cedar siding, a slightly tilted front porch, windows that stuck when the humidity was high, but it had a view of the water from every room and came with a privacy that felt like a luxury after years of being at my mother's beck and call. I signed the lease as Elaine Davis, a name I had chosen for its normalcy. My middle name, paired with the street I grew up on. Not very creative, but it would serve until I decided whether this was my final destination. "What brings you to Harbor Cove, Miss Davis?" asked the property manager as I signed the papers. "A change of scenery," I replied. "I am a freelance graphic designer. I can work from anywhere." This was my cover story, and it contained enough truth to be believable. I had already set up a simple website for Elaine Davis Design and secured a few small projects through online freelancing platforms. Nothing that would make me rich, but enough to establish a work history and supplement my savings. The first week in Harbor Cove passed in a haze of practical tasks: setting up utilities, buying basic necessities for the cottage, finding the best place for coffee, which turned out to be a small shop called Tidal Grounds, run by a woman named Diane. Diane was somewhere in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair always pulled into a messy bun, and a kind of weathered face that spoke of a life lived outdoors. She remembered my order after the second visit and never pushed for conversation, which I appreciated. "You are new in town," she said on my 5th consecutive morning visit. "Not a question, just an observation." "Is it that obvious?" I asked. Harbor Cove is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A new face stands out. She slid my Americano across the counter. "But do not worry, we respect privacy around here. Lots of people come to the coast to start over or find themselves. No one is going to ask for your life story." Something in her matter-of-fact tone made me relax slightly. "Thanks. I am just looking for some quiet for a while." She nodded. "Well, you found the right place for that. Though I should warn you, we do have a community festival coming up next weekend. It gets downright rowdy. Some people even stay out past 9 p.m. Her deadpan delivery made me smile for what felt like the first time in weeks. Back at the cottage, I allowed myself to check my old email and phone. Andrea had sent several increasingly concerned messages. "Mom is telling everyone you abandoned her. What happened after you left the restaurant? Please call me." My work email contained questions about my sudden departure and a formal acceptance of my resignation. The local newspaper had a small item about my house sale in the real estate section. But what caught my attention was an article on the Lakeside Community News website. "Local mother abandoned by daughter after decades of support." The brief piece quoted my mother claiming that I had emptied our joint accounts and disappeared without warning after a minor disagreement at her birthday dinner. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it were not so infuriating. A minor disagreement. She had publicly stated that her birthday wish was for me to leave her life. and I had not emptied the accounts, merely frozen them and placed them in a trust specifically for her care. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking with anger. Even now, hundreds of miles away, she was controlling the narrative, casting herself as the victim. I wondered how long it would take her to discover the accounts were frozen rather than emptied, and what story she would spin then. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the bay. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel everything I had suppressed during the frantic activity of the past 2 weeks. The hurt of that final rejection, the grief for the mother I had always wished for, but never had, the guilt that still tugged at me despite my rational mind, knowing I had done nothing wrong. But beneath these familiar emotions was something new. Relief, freedom, the realization that I was now living on my own terms, answering to no one but myself. I had feared disappearing would feel like a loss of identity, but instead I was finding pieces of myself that had been buried under years of seeking approval. As darkness fell over Harbor Cove, I made a promise to myself. I would give this new life, this new version of me, a fair chance. One day at a time, one choice at a time, I would build something authentic, something mine. Exactly 1 week after I settled in Harbor Cove, my old phone rang. It had been silent for days except for text messages, which I checked periodically but rarely responded to. The screen showed Andrea's name. I let it go to voicemail, as I had done with her previous calls. This time, however, she left a message that made my heart race. "Natalie, please call me back. Mom is in the hospital. She had some kind of heart episode last night. The doctors say it is not serious, but she is really upset about everything. She cannot access the accounts, and her bills are piling up. Whatever happened between you two, please, she needs you right now." "We all do." I played the message twice, trying to read between the lines. A heart episode, not serious but concerning enough to hospitalize her. Bills piling up despite the trust arrangement that should be covering all legitimate expenses. My first instinct was to call back immediately, perhaps even book a flight east. The programming ran deep, the sense of responsibility nearly automatic. But I forced myself to pause, to think. I opened my laptop and logged into my old email. Several new messages from Andrea, growing increasingly frantic. One from Eleanor, my mother's garden club friend, expressing concern about my sudden departure. And 3 from local numbers I did not recognize. I opened Andrea's most recent email first. It contained a photo of our mother in a hospital bed, looking frail and much older than she had just weeks ago at her birthday dinner. The accompanying message was brief. "She is asking for you. Please, Natalie." Whatever she said, she did not mean for this to happen. The local emails turned out to be from a reporter at the Lakeside Gazette seeking comment on what they described as allegations of elder financial abuse. Apparently, my mother had taken her story to the local media. A quick search brought up an online fundraising page titled, "Help Catherine Wilson After Daughter's Abandonment." The page, created by someone from the Historical Society, described how I had emptied joint accounts and disappeared, leaving my elderly mother without access to funds for medical care and basic necessities. It had already raised over $3,000. My hands shook as I navigated to the Lakeside Community Facebook page. There she was, my mother, in a series of photos posted by various community members. Catherine receiving flowers in her hospital room. Catherine looking tearfully at a get-well card made by Andrea's children. Catherine being comforted by friends from the garden club. The comments were what you would expect. How could her daughter do this? After all Catherine did for her. Some people have no sense of family duty. I felt sick. The narrative was completely controlled by my mother, with no one to offer the other side of the story. Not even Andrea, who had witnessed years of emotional abuse, but had always maintained a careful neutrality. I was about to close the laptop when a notification appeared. A direct message on my professional social media account, which I had not yet deactivated. It was from Dr. Sarah Peterson, my mother's primary care physician. "Natalie, I hope this reaches you. I cannot share medical details due to privacy laws, but I want you to know that your mother's condition is stable and not life-threatening. It was a panic attack, not a heart attack. She is physically fine. I know there are two sides to every story, and I just wanted to reach out. Take care of yourself. I stared at the message for a long time. Dr. Peterson had been our family doctor since I was in college. She had treated my father in his final years and had seen firsthand how my mother operated. This discreet message told me everything I needed to know. The hospital stay was real, the crisis was not. I closed the laptop and walked to Tidal Grounds, needing both coffee and human interaction that had nothing to do with my past. Diane was behind the counter as usual, her steady presence somehow comforting. "You look like you have seen a ghost," she commented as she prepared my Americano. "Something like that," I replied. "Just some complicated family stuff back home." She nodded, not pushing for details. As she handed me my coffee, she said, I came to Harbor Cove 15 years ago after my divorce. Ex-husband was a piece of work. Controlling, manipulative, had everyone believing I was crazy when I finally left. I looked up, surprised by the personal revelation. He told everyone I cleaned out our accounts and abandoned him when he was sick. Truth was, I left with nothing but my car and enough money for gas, because I knew if I did not get out then, I never would. She wiped down the counter with methodical strokes. Hardest thing I ever did was not go back when he had his so-called emergency. Turned out he was just fine, physically at least. "How did you handle it?" I asked, recognizing the parallels to my own situation. "Badly at first," she admitted with a wry smile. Almost turned around a dozen times. What helped was asking myself, if I go back now, what changes? Would he suddenly become kind? Would the manipulation stop? Or would I just be walking back into the same situation, but now with everyone watching to make sure I did not leave again? Her words hit me like a physical force. If I went back now, what would change? My mother would still be the same person who wished me out of her life, the same person who is now manipulating the entire town into seeing me as a villain. The only difference would be that I would have lost the fragile new beginning I was building. "Thank you," I said simply. I needed to hear that today. Diane shrugged, just sharing my experience. Whatever you are dealing with, trust your gut. It usually knows the truth, even when your heart is confused. Back at the cottage, I made a decision. I would not return, but I would not remain silent either. I called James Hoffman, my attorney. "I have seen the fundraiser and news stories," he said when I explained the situation. "We can issue a statement clarifying the financial arrangements if you wish. The trust documentation clearly shows that funds are available for all legitimate expenses." "Please do," I said. "And can you also deliver a message to Andrea? Tell her I am safe, I am well, and I am not coming back. The trust will continue to provide for our mother's needs, but I cannot and will not return to that relationship. And if she asks where I am, tell her I am finding my way. That is all she needs to know." After hanging up, I took out a notebook and began to write. Not a justification or defense, but a clear account of the years of emotional abuse. The criticism, the manipulation, the constant moving of goalposts. I wrote about the birthday dinner, quoting my mother's words exactly. I wrote about the financial arrangements I had made, ensuring her care while protecting myself. When I finished, I had 27 pages of detailed memories and incidents. I scanned the document and emailed it to James with instructions to provide it to Andrea if she continued to press for explanations. Then I sent a brief direct email to Dr. Peterson. "Thank you for your message. I am well and safe. The trust will continue to cover all legitimate medical expenses. Please focus on your patient's mental health, as that appears to be the real issue." Finally, I did something I had been avoiding. I logged into the trust account portal and reviewed the recent transaction requests. There were several that had been denied. A request for $5,000 for emergency medical expenses with no documentation. A withdrawal attempt for $3,000 for home repairs without any contractor quotes, and most tellingly, a transfer request for $10,000 to Andrea's account for temporary support assistance. The trust administrator had done exactly as instructed, requiring documentation for all expenses and approving only legitimate costs. My mother's utilities had been paid. Her regular medications were covered. A cleaning service had been authorized, but her attempts to access large sums of cash had been consistently denied. No wonder she had escalated to a medical emergency and public fundraising. She was not destitute. She was denied access to money she felt entitled to control. I closed the accounts page and took a deep breath. For the first time since leaving, I felt completely certain of my decision. I was not abandoning an elderly woman in need. I was protecting myself from a lifetime of further manipulation while still ensuring her basic needs were met. That night, I walked along the harbor as the sun set. The weight that had pressed on my chest since receiving Andrea's message had lifted. I would not be pulled back into the cycle. I would move forward one day at a time, building a life based on my own choices rather than someone else's demands. Harbor Cove might not be my permanent home, but it was the place where I had found my voice, where I had finally learned to say no to the guilt and obligation that had defined so much of my life. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The weeks following my decision not to return brought unexpected clarity. With each passing day in Harbor Cove, the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my judgment for decades began to dissipate. In its place came a growing sense of empowerment and purpose. I began by methodically documenting every aspect of my relationship with my mother, the trust account statements showing years of my contributions to her care, text messages where she belittled my achievements or manipulated me with vague health concerns, emails where she compared me unfavorably to Andrea, voicemails with passive-aggressive jabs disguised as concern. For the first time, I saw the pattern in its entirety rather than as isolated incidents. It was overwhelming, even to me who had lived through it. How had I normalized this treatment for so long? I organized everything chronologically, adding context where needed, and sent the complete file to James Hoffman with instructions to make it available to Andrea if she continued to press for explanations about my departure. "This is quite comprehensive," James said during our phone call. "Are you sure you want to share all of this? Some of these personal exchanges are quite revealing." "That is the point," I replied. "For years, I have protected my mother's public image at the expense of my own well-being. I am done hiding the truth. Andrea should know exactly what she is defending." The next step was addressing the financial situation more permanently. Working with James, I restructured the trust to ensure greater transparency. Monthly statements would be sent to both my mother and Andrea. All legitimate expenses would continue to be covered, but the trust administrator would provide detailed explanations for any denied requests. Additionally, I added a new condition. My mother would need to attend at least 6 sessions with a therapist before any discretionary funds above basic living expenses would be approved. It was a stipulation she would likely rage against, but one I felt was necessary for any possibility of healthier interactions in the future. "Your sister has been calling daily," James informed me. "She seems genuinely concerned about you, not just your mother's situation." "You can tell her I am safe and well," I said. "And if she asks about returning, tell her I will consider communication after our mother has completed the required therapy sessions." 2 days later, I received an email from Andrea, sent through James. The subject line was simple. I had no idea. "Natalie," she wrote, "James shared the documentation you provided. I honestly did not know the extent of what you were dealing with. Mom has always been critical and difficult, but what I saw in those messages and records goes far beyond that. The things she said to you, the constant belittling, the emotional manipulation. I am so sorry I was not there for you. I am even more sorry that I sometimes participated without realizing what I was contributing to." She continued, "I showed Mom the trust statements proving that you did not steal money from her, just structured it for her actual needs. She was furious. then defensive, and finally broke down. This is the first time I have ever seen her truly face consequences for her behavior. The community fundraiser has been taken down after the organizer learned the truth about the financial arrangements. The email concluded with an unexpected request. I know you need space and time. You have every right to both. But when you are ready, I would like to rebuild our relationship independent of Mom. I missed so much by keeping my distance all these years. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was also abandoning you to bear the brunt of her behavior. Whatever boundaries you need, I will respect them. I read the email several times, emotions shifting with each reading. Relief that Andrea finally saw the truth, lingering hurt that it had taken my complete disappearance for her to acknowledge what had been happening, hope that perhaps one relationship from my past might be worth salvaging. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I took the message to my weekly session with Dr. Lisa Morgan, a therapist I had started seeing in Harbor Cove. Finding her had been another step in my healing journey, an acknowledgement that disappearing geographically did not automatically heal the emotional wounds I carried. "This is significant progress," Dr. Morgan said after reading Andrea's email. "How do you feel about potentially rebuilding that relationship?" Cautious, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe she truly understands now. Another part worries this is just another way to try to pull me back into the old dynamic. Those are valid concerns. What would rebuilding this relationship on your terms look like? I considered this carefully. Distance, at least initially. Clear boundaries about what I will and will not discuss. No pressure to reconnect with our mother. And honesty, even when it is uncomfortable. Dr. Morgan nodded. Those sound like healthy parameters. Remember, you get to set the pace here. There is no timeline for healing or reconciliation. That evening, I sent a brief response to Andrea through James. Thank you for your email. I need more time, but I am open to careful, limited communication in the future. For now, please respect my privacy and my decision to remain where I am. The following week brought another development. My mother, apparently realizing that her public victim narrative was crumbling as the truth emerged, took a different approach. She sent a letter via James, her first direct communication since the birthday dinner. The letter was a masterclass in what Dr. Morgan later identified as non-apology apologies. I am sorry you felt hurt by my words. I never intended for you to take such drastic action. If I was sometimes hard on you, it was only because I wanted the best for you. She concluded with, I have agreed to talk to someone as the trust requires, though I think at my age it is ridiculous to have to explain myself to a stranger. I hope this proves how much I want to fix whatever misunderstanding has come between us. Not once did she acknowledge the specific hurtful behaviors or take genuine responsibility. Even her participation in therapy was framed as a concession to me rather than a step toward her own growth. I shared the letter with Dr. Morgan at our next session. This is very typical, she said. When initial tactics fail, manipulative individuals often pivot to what appears to be conciliation, but without actual accountability. Notice how she positions herself as still being reasonable while you are the one who has taken drastic action. She is agreeing to the therapy requirement, but framing it as an unreasonable demand. She is graciously accommodating. So nothing has really changed, I said, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and validation. Change takes time, especially for someone who has operated this way for decades. The important thing is that you can now recognize these patterns and respond from a place of strength rather than obligation. With that perspective, I drafted a response that James would deliver. I acknowledge receipt of your letter. I am glad you are speaking with a therapist and hope you find it valuable. At this time, I am focusing on my own healing and am not ready for direct communication. The trust will continue to provide for your needs as established. Brief, factual, and free of the emotional hooks that had ensnared me in the past. 3 months after my departure from Lakeside, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. My mother, unable to access funds without documentation and facing a community that now had questions about her initial claims, had no choice but to comply with the trust conditions. Andrea reported through our now regular email exchanges that our mother had attended the required therapy sessions, though with minimal enthusiasm. Andrea herself had begun to establish clearer boundaries in her interactions with our mother. I never realized how much I automatically accommodated her moods and demands until I started watching for it, she wrote. Now I can see it happening in real time. Yesterday, I actually said no when she asked me to rearrange my work schedule to take her shopping. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. Small steps, but significant ones. The power dynamic that had defined our family for decades was slowly being recalibrated. As for me, I was building a life in Harbor Cove that increasingly felt like my own. My freelance design business was growing steadily. I had joined a local hiking group that explored the coastal trails every weekend. I had regular conversations with Diane at tidal grounds that had evolved from casual exchanges to genuine friendship. I was no longer Natalie, who existed primarily in relation to her demanding mother. I was becoming Elaine, who designed beautiful websites, who knew the best spot to watch the sunset over the bay, who was learning to kayak, who was rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under years of seeking approval. When Andrea asked if she might visit sometime in the future, I found myself considering the possibility rather than immediately rejecting it. Not yet, I replied, but maybe someday. On neutral ground, just the two of us. It was a small opening, but an authentic one, not offered from obligation or guilt, but from a growing sense that I could engage with parts of my past without being consumed by them. 6 months after the birthday dinner that had changed everything, I received another letter from my mother. This one was different from the first. Shorter, less defensive, and containing something I had never heard from her before. A genuine apology. Natalie, she wrote, I have been talking with Dr. Wilson weekly for the past few months. He has helped me see patterns in my behavior that I never recognized before. The way I treated you was wrong. Not sometimes, not because I wanted the best for you, but consistently and without justification. I was cruel to the person who showed me the most care and loyalty. I cannot undo those years, but I want you to know that I see it now and I am truly sorry. She continued, I would like a chance to try to do better, but I also understand if that is not possible. Andrea tells me you are well and building a new life. Whatever you decide about our relationship going forward, I want you to know that I am proud of your courage in finally putting yourself first. It is something I should have taught you long ago. I read the letter several times, searching for the manipulative undertones I had become so adept at identifying. There was a simplicity to it that felt unfamiliar coming from her. Not a grand performance of remorse, not a bid for sympathy, just a straightforward acknowledgement of harm done. Was it enough to rebuild a relationship? I was not sure, but it was enough to feel that my decision to leave had been the right one, not just for me, but perhaps for her as well. Sometimes the greatest act of love is creating the space for necessary change, even when that space feels like absence. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I would respond when I felt ready, not out of obligation or guilt, but from whatever authentic feeling emerged as I continued my own healing journey. For now, it was enough to know that I had broken a cycle that had seemed unbreakable. By disappearing from a toxic relationship, I had finally begun to appear more fully as myself. 6 months turned into a year, and Harbor Cove began to truly feel like home. What had started as a temporary refuge became the foundation for a life I had never imagined possible. The small cottage overlooking the bay was now legally mine, purchased with the money I had once set aside for others' approval. My freelance design business had grown beyond individual clients to include several small agencies that contracted my services regularly. I had even hired a virtual assistant to help manage the increasing workload. The creativity I had once suppressed to accommodate my mother's expectations now flowed freely. resulting in work that brought both satisfaction and recognition. Most importantly, I had built connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. Diane from Tidal Grounds had become a true friend, introducing me to her circle of fiercely independent women who had each, in their own way, reinvented themselves in this coastal community. There was Margaret, a former corporate lawyer who now ran the local bookstore. Sophia, a retired teacher who taught art classes in her beachfront studio, and Lily, a widow who had moved to Harbor Cove after losing her husband and now led the hiking group I had joined. These relationships were different from any I had known before. No one expected me to diminish myself to make them comfortable. No one kept score of perceived slights or failures. We supported each other's goals, celebrated successes without envy, and offered honest feedback without cruelty. It was healing in ways I had not known I needed. My communication with Andrea had evolved from cautious emails to regular video calls. Our relationship, freed from the triangulation our mother had always created between us, developed into something new and unexpected. Friendship between equals. We discovered shared interests and perspectives that had been obscured by our different positions in the family dynamic. I still cannot believe we both read the same obscure mystery series growing up and never knew it, Andrea said during one of our calls. What else did we miss about each other all these years? Probably a lot, I replied. We were so busy being the roles Mom assigned us, the successful one and the disappointing one, that we never got the chance to just be sisters. Andrea nodded. I am sorry I did not try harder to break out of that pattern earlier. I think I was afraid that if I was not the good one, I would become the target instead. We were both doing what we needed to survive, I said, realizing as I spoke that I truly believe this. The important thing is that we are changing the pattern now. My relationship with my mother had taken a more complex path. After her letter of genuine apology, we had begun a careful, limited correspondence. No phone calls or video chats, just handwritten letters exchanged every few weeks. It was safer this way, allowing me time to process my responses without the pressure of immediate reaction. Her letters revealed a woman I had never known, or perhaps one who had been buried beneath decades of bitterness and control. She wrote about her own childhood with critical parents who had never approved of her choices. She shared memories of my father that were tender rather than dismissive. She asked questions about my new life and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Dr. Morgan helped me navigate this evolving relationship, always reminding me that forgiveness did not require forgetting or returning to harmful patterns. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and resentment, she explained. It does not mean you must resume a relationship that was damaging to you. You can forgive someone and still maintain the boundaries that keep you safe and healthy. With this guidance, I found myself able to acknowledge the positive changes in my mother's communication while remaining firm in my decision to maintain physical distance. I could appreciate her efforts at growth without feeling responsible for her emotional well-being. I could respond with kindness without sacrificing my hard-won independence. Catherine, too, was finding a new equilibrium. According to Andrea, the required therapy had extended far beyond the initial 6 sessions. She now saw Dr. Wilson regularly and had joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children. The garden club and historical society remained important parts of her life, but she had developed new interests as well, including a watercolor class at the community center. She is different, Andrea told me during one of our calls. Not perfect, not completely transformed, but different. She catches herself now when she starts to criticize or control. She apologizes when she slips back into old patterns. I never thought I would see that happen. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Gladness that my mother was finding healthier ways to relate to others, sadness for all the years we had lost to destructive patterns, a tinge of bitterness that it had taken my complete disappearance to catalyze this change, and beneath it all, a quiet gratitude that my decision to leave had ultimately benefited not just me, but everyone involved. As the 1-year anniversary of my departure approached, I found myself reflecting deeply on everything that had transpired. The birthday dinner that had been the breaking point, the careful planning of my disappearance, the difficult weeks of adjustment in Harbor Cove, the gradual rebuilding of my sense of self apart from my role as dutiful daughter. I took a day off work and hiked to my favorite spot on the coastal trail, a hidden cove accessible only at low tide. Sitting on a driftwood log, watching waves crash against the rocks, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the journey. I had not abandoned an elderly parent, as the initial narrative suggested. I had not acted impulsively out of wounded pride. I had made a necessary, if painful, choice to end a cycle of emotional abuse that had defined most of my life. I had disappeared not to punish my mother, but to finally appear as myself. The path to healing was neither straight nor simple. There were still days when guilt ambushed me, when I questioned my decision, when the programming of a lifetime whispered that I was selfish for putting my needs first. But those voices grew fainter with time, replaced by a stronger conviction that I had done what was necessary for my survival and growth. I had learned that sometimes love looks like leaving, that boundaries are not walls but vital structures that allow for healthier connections, that forgiveness does not require reunion, that healing happens in unexpected places and forms. Most importantly, I had discovered that disappearing from a toxic relationship could be the first step in finally appearing in my own life. By honoring my need for safety and respect, I had created space for authentic connections based on mutual care rather than obligation or fear. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, casting golden light across the water, I made a promise to myself. I would continue this journey of self-discovery with curiosity and compassion. I would maintain the boundaries that protected my well-being while remaining open to genuine growth and change in my relationships. I would build a life defined by my own values rather than others' expectations. Walking back along the coastal path as twilight softened the landscape, I felt a profound sense of peace. The woman who had fled Connecticut in pain and confusion a year ago was not the same woman now returning to her cottage by the bay. I had disappeared to save myself, only to discover that in disappearing I had finally begun to appear more fully than ever before. Back home, I sat on my porch watching the last light fade from the sky and wrote one final letter to complete the circle, not to my mother or sister, but to myself, a letter of acknowledgement and celebration for the courage it had taken to break free, for the strength to rebuild, for the wisdom to forgive without compromising my boundaries. Dear Natalie, I wrote, using the name I had partially set aside but would always carry as part of my history. You did what seemed impossible. You chose yourself when every force in your life had taught you that your needs came last. You survived the breaking of familial bonds and discovered that what grew in their place was stronger and healthier than what came before. Be proud of this journey. It is not finished, but you have already come so far. As stars appeared in the clear night sky above Harbor Cove, I felt a deep gratitude for the painful gift my mother had unwittingly given me at her birthday dinner. In wishing me gone from her life, she had freed me to find my own. Sometimes the endings we fear most become the beginnings we need most desperately. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away from a relationship that was hurting you? Or perhaps you have been on the other side, realizing too late the value of someone you pushed away? I would love to hear your stories and perspectives in the comments below. And if this journey of breaking free and finding myself resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is disappear from relationships that diminish us so we can finally appear as our authentic selves. Thank you for bearing witness to my story, and may you find the courage to write your own on your own terms.